Second Lieutenant Marcus Yun had been at the base for 4 months, and in that time he'd developed a habit of underestimating exactly the wrong people. So when a gray-haired woman in a flight suit walked slowly into the ready room, moving with the careful, measured steps of someone well past the age most fighter pilots retired, he leaned over to the pilot next to him and didn't bother lowering his voice. "Somebody's grandma get lost on her way to a base tour?" A few nearby pilots chuckled. The woman didn't react. She simply walked to the front of the room, set down a folder, and turned to face everyone. "Seriously," Marcus continued, grinning, "no offense, ma'am, but I think flying might be a young person's game at this point." The woman looked at him for a long moment, something unreadable in her expression. That's when every single pilot in the stealth squadron, 22 of the most decorated aviators on the entire base, rose to their feet at once and saluted. "Welcome back, Falcon Queen," the squadron commander said. Marcus Yun felt the blood drain from his face as 21 veteran pilots stood in perfect silence around him, and he slowly realized he was the only person in that room who had no idea who he'd just insulted. Stick around, because what happens over the next 20 minutes of this story is one of the most satisfying reversals we've ever told on this channel. And if you love watching arrogance collide head-on with legend, hit subscribe right now, because we post a new story exactly like this one every single week. Colonel Diane Marsh had been flying fighter aircraft for 31 years, and in that time, she'd earned a call sign that most pilots on this base only ever heard whispered in stories passed down from instructors who'd flown with her decades earlier. Falcon Queen. The name came from a legendary mission early in her career, a solo engagement against overwhelming odds that had become required reading in advanced tactics courses, long before most of the pilots in that ready room had even enlisted. She'd flown longer, survived more, and taught more successful fighter pilots than almost anyone else still active in the service. At 58, she was well past the age most pilots retired from active flight status, but an extraordinary combination of physical conditioning, medical waivers, and a service record too valuable to lose had kept her flying long after her peers had moved to instructor roles or retirement entirely. She now served as a senior tactical advisor to elite squadrons, reviewing operations, occasionally flying training missions herself, and mentoring the next generation of pilots who would eventually take her place. Today, she'd been asked to personally brief the stealth squadron ahead of a critical joint exercise, a squadron that, unbeknownst to its newest lieutenant, had specifically requested her by name because of her unmatched experience with exactly the tactical scenario they were about to face. She hadn't expected a warm welcome from everyone in that room. She'd learned, over 3 decades, that some people needed proof before they offered respect. She just hadn't expected the proof to arrive quite this fast. Marcus Yun wasn't trying to be cruel. He was young, a little too confident, and completely unaware that the woman standing in front of him had more combat flight hours than every pilot in that room combined, including the squadron commander. "I mean, I'm just saying," he continued, glancing around for approval he was rapidly losing. "Shouldn't there be, like, an age limit for this stuff? No offense, ma'am, but this isn't exactly a job for—" "For what, Lieutenant?" Diane asked calmly, her voice cutting cleanly through the room. He hesitated, suddenly aware that the laughter around him had stopped entirely. "For, someone your age, ma'am. I just mean reflexes, reaction time. That kind of thing tends to—" "Tends to what?" He had no good way to finish that sentence, and he seemed to realize it in real time. That's when the squadron commander stood, followed immediately by every other pilot in the room, chairs scraping back in near-perfect unison. "Welcome back, Falcon Queen," the commander said, saluting sharply. "It's an honor to have you briefing us today." Marcus sat frozen for a full 3 seconds before scrambling to his feet, saluting a full beat behind everyone else in the room. If you love watching the exact second someone's confidence completely collapses, you're going to enjoy the rest of this story even more. But first, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because this channel is full of moments exactly like this one. For a long, uncomfortable moment, nobody in the room said anything. Every pilot present had heard stories about Falcon Queen, the solo engagement that had become legend, the decades of missions that had shaped modern fighter tactics, the reputation that preceded her into every room she walked into. Nobody had expected her to walk into this particular briefing looking exactly like what she was. A woman in her late 50s who'd earned every gray hair on her head the hard way. "Colonel Marsh," Marcus finally managed, his voice noticeably smaller than it had been 30 seconds earlier. I had absolutely no idea, ma'am. I'm sorry, You don't need to apologize for not recognizing my face, Lieutenant," Diane said, setting her folder down calmly. "Plenty of people don't. That's not the part I'd worry about." "Then what should I worry about, ma'am?" "The part where you decided, the moment you saw gray hair and a slower walk, that I couldn't possibly still belong in a cockpit," she said. "You didn't ask why I was here. You just assumed age meant I'd become irrelevant." He had no response to that. "I've been flying longer than you've been alive, Lieutenant," she continued, not unkindly. "I've survived engagements that are still studied in tactics courses you probably sat through without ever knowing my name was attached to them. But that's honestly not the real issue here." "Then what is, ma'am?" "The real issue is you'd have made that same joke about any pilot who looked older or slower than you expected, regardless of what they'd actually done in this uniform. That instinct is the thing worth examining, not just this one moment." The briefing itself was, by every account, one of the most valuable sessions that Squadron had received in months. Diane Marsh walked the room through a tactical scenario drawn directly from her own combat experience, breaking down decisions and adjustments with a clarity that came only from having actually lived through the consequences of getting them wrong. Pilots who'd been flying advanced aircraft for years found themselves taking notes like cadets, absorbing details they'd never encountered in any training manual. Marcus sat through the entire session in near total silence, the earlier confidence completely drained out of him, replaced by something closer to quiet awe. After the briefing ended, he approached her privately, waiting until the room had mostly cleared. "Colonel Marsh, I wanted to apologize properly, not the version I gave in front of everyone." "Go ahead." "I judged you based on your age and how you walked into the room, and decided that meant you didn't belong here anymore. That's not the kind of officer I want to become." She studied him for a long moment. "That's a more honest answer than most people manage, Lieutenant." "I've been flying for less than a year," he admitted. "I think I assumed experience just expires at some point. That the only pilots worth respecting were the ones who looked the part I expected." "It doesn't expire," she said. "It compounds. Every year I've kept flying, I've made fewer mistakes, not more. The reflexes change. The judgment sharpens. Most people don't understand that distinction until they've lived long enough to see it happen in themselves." "I won't make that mistake again, ma'am." "See that you don't," she said. "Not because of who I turned out to be, because of who the next pilot you underestimate might actually be." In the weeks that followed, something in Marcus Yoon visibly shifted. He didn't transform overnight. That isn't how real growth happens, and Diane wasn't interested in performances of guilt. But the other pilots in his squadron started noticing small things. He stopped commenting on how people looked when they walked into a room. He started asking questions about experience and background before deciding who deserved his attention and who didn't. 3 months later, during a joint training exercise, an older instructor pilot with a limp and a quiet demeanor joined his formation for a session. The old version of Marcus might have made a comment. This version simply introduced himself, asked about his background, and treated him exactly like every other pilot in the room, right up until the debrief revealed the man had flown more combat missions in a single deployment than Marcus would likely fly in his entire career. He didn't need a call sign to remind him twice. Diane Marsh continued flying training missions well into the following year, her reputation only growing among the younger pilots who now sought her out specifically for the kind of hard-won insight no simulator could teach. The story of the Ready Room incident became something of a legend itself, retold not to embarrass Marcus, but as a reminder to every new pilot who walked through that door about exactly the kind of assumption that could cost you the respect of a legend before you even knew her name. Here's a question for you. If you were sitting in that Ready Room and heard the commander call her Falcon Queen right after watching Marcus mock her age, would you have laughed along with the room earlier? Or would you have been the one person who paused and asked who she actually was first? Tell me your honest answer in the comments below. I want to know if you think age would have changed your first impression the way it changed his. If this story kept you hooked the way it did while I was writing it, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because we post a brand new story just like this one every single week. Stories about the people who prove every doubter wrong exactly when it matters most. Tap the notification bell too, so you never miss the next one. Thanks for watching all the way through. I'll see you in the next story.